A man who once scribbled plays in the shadow of prison bars invited a monk in exile to a castle, and in that collision of ink and saffron, the world tilted ever so slightly toward light. Step into Prague, 1990, where the air crackles with the raw electricity of freedom, where Václav Havel, playwright, dissident, dreamer, has just wrestled a nation from the jaws of communism and claimed the presidency of Czechoslovakia. The Velvet Revolution's echoes still bounce off the city's ancient stones, its people dizzy with the taste of unshackled days. And here stands Havel, barely a month into power, his hair wild, his eyes alight with something fiercer than ambition. He doesn't pause to bask in victory or court the favor of the powerful. No, he hurls a gauntlet at the feet of caution, inviting His Holiness the Dalai Lama, a figure China brands a traitor, to cross oceans and meet him in the heart of his reborn land. Met in person multiple times, the first time in 1990 in Prague, when he invited the Dalai Lama to visit, a sentence so humble, so unassuming, yet it unfurls into a saga that pulses with defiance, friendship, and a stubborn, luminous hope. Lean in, won't you? This isn't just history. It's a cry from the soul of humanity, a story so alive it demands we feel its heat, its weight, its wild, beating heart. Picture Prague in that fragile winter of 1990. The Vltava River glinting under a sky still shedding, the gray of decades past. The city is a paradox. Old spires piercing the heavens, new dreams stitching themselves into the fabric of its streets. Havel, not yet the polished president of the Czech Republic. That title waits 3 years in the wings until Czechoslovakia splits like a seed pod into two nations, sits in Prague Castle, a fortress of stone and story. He's an improbable leader. This man who once hunched over a typewriter in dim apartments, penning truths the regime couldn't stomach. For years, he'd been a voice in the wilderness, a thorn in the side of a system that crushed dissent with iron fists and cold cells. Now, elevated by a revolution so gentle it's named for velvet, he holds the reins of a country teetering between past and possibility. What does he do with this fleeting, precious moment? Does he shore up alliances, soothe the nerves of jittery neighbors, or bow to the distant growl of China, a nation whose economic might already casts a long shadow? Oh, no. He does something so bold, so reckless, it feels like a line from one of his own absurdist plays. He invites the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of a Tibet suffocating under Beijing's boot, to step into his castle and his cause. Can you hear the audacity ringing through the ages? Can you feel the shiver of it? Let's linger there, in that choice, because it's a spark that could set the world ablaze if we let it. Havel had mused about this in his New Year's address on January 1st, 1990, his voice trembling with the weight of a nation reborn. Standing before his people, he spoke of inviting two figures, Pope John Paul II and the Dalai Lama, to bless this fragile freedom with their presence, even if only for a day. It's a fleeting line, easily lost in the tide of his words, but oh, how it blooms. By February 1st, the Dalai Lama is there, his feet touching Czech soil, his robes a blaze of saffron against the muted palette of a Prague winter. Imagine him arriving, exiled since 1959, a man who fled Tibet as a young monk when China's tanks rolled in, now a global symbol of peace with a laugh that disarms and a resolve that endures. And Havel, waiting to greet him, a man who knows the taste of captivity, who spent years in and out of prison for daring to write, to speak, to live. Isn't it staggering? Two souls forged in such different fires, one of Himalayan snows and prayer wheels, the other of Eastern European concrete and clandestine scripts, meeting in a castle that's seen kings fall and empires fade. Their handshake is no mere formality. It's a bridge across chasms, a quiet roar against the silence of oppression. Why does this grip me so fiercely? Because it's a rebellion dressed in civility, a middle finger to the powers that demand obedience. Over conscience, China, of course, seethes. To them, the Dalai Lama is a separatist, a threat to their iron grip on Tibet, a land they've claimed since 1950, smothering its culture, its cries, its very breath. Havel knows this. How could he not? He's no naive dreamer, blind to the chessboard of global politics. Trade deals hang in the balance, diplomatic ties quiver, and yet he shrugs it off like a coat too heavy for spring. He chooses the monk over the machine, the human over the ledger. Doesn't that thrill you, just a little? In a world where leaders so often bend to the loudest threats or the fattest wallets, here's Havel, fresh from his own chains, saying, "No, I will stand with the voiceless even if it costs me." It's almost absurd, isn't it? This playwright turned president risking it all for a man in exile, a man whose weapons are compassion and a stubborn refusal to hate. But that's the magic of it. The wild, beating pulse. The absurd courage to be human when the world begs you to be small. And oh, how that first meeting in 1990 is just the beginning. They don't stop there, these two. No single encounter could hold the breadth of their bond. It stretches across years, decades even, a thread of gold woven through the chaos of the 90s and beyond. Havel, who becomes the first president of the Czech Republic in 1993 when Czechoslovakia peacefully splits, keeps the door open. The Dalai Lama returns again and again, their meetings a rhythm in the symphony of their lives. There's Forum 2000, a brainchild of Havel's launched in 1997, a gathering meant to wrestle with the world's big questions: democracy, justice, the soul of humanity, and who's a frequent guest? The Dalai Lama, of course, his presence a quiet anchor amid the clamor of debate. Each visit is a pilgrimage, a testament to a friendship that's more than photo ops or headlines. It's personal, visceral, a lifeline between two men who've stared into the abyss of tyranny and chosen to laugh, to hope, to fight. Can't you feel the weight of that? Two figures, one who toppled a regime with words, the other who faces down an empire with a smile, finding solace in each other's defiance. Let's paint some of those moments, shall we? Imagine a crisp autumn day in Prague, years after that first meeting, say 2008. The city's golden now, leaves tumbling through the streets, and the Dalai Lama is back, speaking at Forum 2000, his voice soft yet piercing, cutting through the noise of a world growing louder, brasher, more cynical. Havel sits nearby, older now, his frame leaner, his eyes still sharp with that dissident's fire. They share a glance, a nod. Do they need words anymore? Their history hums between them, a melody of shared battles and unspoken promises. Or, leap forward to 2011. Oh, my heart clenches at this one. Havel is dying, his body frail from years of prison, illness, and the relentless grind of leadership. He's in a wheelchair, his breath shallow, his time slipping away. Word reaches the Dalai Lama in India, and what does he do? He boards a plane, crosses continents, arrives in Prague on December 10th, just 8 days before Havel's final curtain falls. They meet, one last time, in a room heavy with endings. What do they say? Do they reminisce about 1990? That reckless, radiant beginning? Do they laugh at the absurdity of it all? Or sit in silence, letting their presence speak? I wonder, don't you, what it's like to face death with a friend who's walked your road, who's carried the same torch. This isn't just a tale of two men. It's a mirror, a shout, a philosophical gauntlet flung at our feet. What are we willing to risk for what we believe? Havel and the Dalai Lama answer with their lives, their meetings a living echo of Camus' fierce creed. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. Havel rebels by inviting a man China despises, knowing the cost, trade deals sour, diplomats hiss, and not giving a damn. The Dalai Lama rebels by showing up, his every step a soft yet unshakable no to the erasure of his people. Together, they build a beacon, a light flickering in the gloom, not just for Tibet or Czechoslovakia, but for anyone who's ever felt the weight of a cage. That first meeting in 1990 sets the stage, yes, but it's the years that follow, their stubborn, beautiful insistence on standing together that etch their story into the stone of eternity. Zoom out, and the canvas grows vast, almost overwhelming. That initial encounter in 1990 births a Czech-Tibetan kinship that lingers still, a solidarity forged in the crucible of shared suffering. Havel sees in Tibet's plight the ghost of Czechoslovakia's past, decades of silenced voices, crushed dreams, and he refuses to turn away. His invitations, reckless and glorious, ripple outward, inspiring others to lift their voices, bolstering the Dalai Lama's exile with a stage in Prague. It's not just personal, it's political, cultural, a thread that ties two peoples across continents. Czech flags wave at Tibetan rallies. Prague's streets host vigils for a land most Czechs will never see. And it all traces back to that February day when Havel said, "Come." Doesn't that move you? A small nation, barely free itself, reaching out to another still bound. It's a poem written in action, a defiance of the borders that divide us. Yet there's a shadow here, a bittersweet edge that sharpens the tale. Havel's death in 2011 doesn't end the story, but it shifts it. Later, Czech leaders, their eyes on China's purse strings, waver where Havel stood firm. In 2016, when the Dalai Lama visits again, some officials distance themselves, bowing to Beijing's pressure, their caution a faint echo against Havel's blaze. Does that dim the light? Not a bit. It throws it into sharper relief, makes it a challenge flung at our feet. What would you have done? The technicality of titles, Havel as Czechoslovakia's leader in 1990, not yet the Czech Republic's, fades beside the truth of his choice. He acted when the world was watching, when his nation was raw and undefined, and that's what haunts me, thrills me, keeps me turning this over in my mind like a stone smoothed by a river. So here I stand, spinning this tale into the air, feeling its pulse quicken my own. It's not perfect, history never is, but it's alive, crackling with the kind of hope Havel himself named. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. For Havel, for the Dalai Lama, it made sense to meet, to clasp hands across the chasm of oppression, to say with every visit, "We are here, and we will not be silent." Their story tugs at me, begs me to ask, what cage am I breaking today? What light am I shining? And you, what about you? In a world that so often bends toward the safe and the small, their lives roar back. Be bold, be kind, be free. Let's stretch this further, dive deeper into the marrow of it. Think of Havel in those early days of 1990, pacing the castles, halls, his mind a whirl of ideals and ink. He's not a politician by trade, his hands are more accustomed to pens than gavels, and yet here he is, thrust onto a stage where every move is watched. The Soviet shadow still looms, the West is wary, and China's rise is a distant rumble growing louder. He could play it safe, build bridges with the practical, the profitable. But Havel isn't wired that way. He's a man who once wrote in his essay, The Power of the Powerless, about living in truth, about the small acts that crack the facade of lies. Inviting the Dalai Lama isn't a grand strategy. It's a small act, magnified by its sincerity, its refusal to bend. Doesn't that resonate? In our own lives, how often do we choose the safe lie over the risky truth? Havel chooses truth, and the Dalai Lama, with his gentle laugh and unyielding spirit, becomes its living echo. Or consider the Dalai Lama's journey to that meeting. He's 55 in 1990, more than 3 decades into exile. A man who's seen his homeland swallowed, his monasteries razed, his people scattered. Yet he arrives in Prague not with bitterness, but with a warmth that disarms, a presence that invites. He's no stranger to leaders. By then, he's met presidents, popes, poets. But Havel is different. Havel's not just a head of state. He's a fellow traveler, a man who's tasted the bitterness of powerlessness and turned it into something else. Their conversation, lost to us in its details, must have danced between the mundane and the profound, a blend of laughter and longing. Did they speak of Tibet's mountains, Czechoslovakia's scars? Did they share a quiet joke about the absurdity of their paths? I'd give anything to hear it, to sit in that room and feel the air hum with their shared defiance. Their story spills. Beyond Prague, too. It's 1990, but it's also 2000, 2008, 2011. Moments scattered like stars across a night sky. Each meeting builds on the last, a constellation of courage. Forum 2000 becomes their stage, a place where the Dalai Lama's voice, soft, steady, cuts through the din of a world obsessed with speed and profit. Havel, ever the playwright, crafts this space not for answers but for questions, for the messy, beautiful wrestle of ideas. And the Dalai Lama, with his Buddhist lens, brings a stillness that anchors it all. They're not solving the world's woes. They're daring us to face them, to live them, to care. Isn't that the point? Not victory, but meaning. By 2011, the end looms. Havel's health crumbles. Prison took its toll, years of smoking and stress piling on, and the Dalai Lama, now in his 70s, feels the urgency of time. That final flight to Prague is a pilgrimage of its own, a race against mortality. They meet, and the world fades. China's threats, Czech politics, the clamor of history. All of it falls away. It's just 2 men, 2 friends, 2 lights flickering in the dusk. Havel dies days later, on December 18th, and the Dalai Lama mourns, calling him a man of vision, a brother in spirit. Doesn't that ache? A friendship so deep it defies borders, outlasts empires, lingers in the silence they leave behind? This tale isn't done with us yet. It's a call, a challenge, a whisper in the dark. Havel and the Dalai Lama don't just meet. They collide, they ignite, they demand we look at ourselves. What are we risking? What are we building? Their lives, messy, bold, unbroken, shout through the years, be more. From a castle in Prague to a monk's exile from 1990 to now, their story burns, a flame we can still carry if we dare. So I ask again, and I'll keep asking, what cage are you breaking? What light are you shining? Their answer echoes. Oh, how it echoes. And it's ours to take up, to live, to make our own.